In 1945, inside a quiet interrogation room in defeated Germany, American intelligence officers asked a question they believed would confirm everything they already knew about the war. They expected praise for the Sherman tank, admiration for the strategic bombing campaign, or perhaps grudging respect for advanced weapons like long-range aircraft. Instead, the answer they received was completely unexpected. Several captured German generals, including Gerd von Rundstedt, spoke not about heavy armor or firepower, but about a small, lightweight vehicle that had seemed almost insignificant on the battlefield. They pointed to the American Jeep as one of the most impressive tools of the entire war. For men who had commanded massive armies and overseen some of the largest tank battles in history, this answer was almost unbelievable. These were officers who had relied on powerful machines like the Panther and Tiger tanks, symbols of German engineering and military strength. Yet when asked to evaluate the enemy's capabilities, they highlighted a vehicle with barely 60 horsepower, no armor to speak of, and a design so simple it could be repaired in the field with basic tools. To them, the Jeep represented something far more dangerous than a heavily armored tank. It represented mobility, flexibility, and a level of logistical efficiency that Germany could never match. One general reportedly explained that the Jeep allowed American forces to move faster, coordinate better, and adapt instantly to changing battlefield conditions. It could traverse terrain that heavier vehicles struggled with, carry officers, scouts, and supplies, and operate reliably in environments ranging from deserts to frozen landscapes. While German strategy often depended on concentrated force and powerful breakthroughs, the Americans seemed to be everywhere at once, and the Jeep was a big part of that illusion. This idea challenges one of the most common assumptions about warfare, that victory is determined by the biggest guns or the strongest armor. Throughout history, armies have invested enormous resources into building more powerful weapons, believing that technological superiority and firepower would guarantee success. But the Second World War revealed a different reality. The ability to move troops, maintain supply lines, and adapt quickly often mattered more than raw, destructive capability. In this context, the Jeep was not just a vehicle, it was a force multiplier. To understand why this small machine impressed seasoned German commanders, we have to look beyond the front lines and examine how wars are actually fought. A tank may dominate a battlefield engagement, but it requires fuel, maintenance, spare parts, and coordination. Without an efficient system to support it, even the most advanced weapon becomes useless. The Jeep, on the other hand, was designed with practicality in mind. It was easy to produce, easy to repair, and incredibly versatile. It could serve as a reconnaissance vehicle, a command car, a weapons platform, or even an ambulance. American forces used the Jeep in ways that maximized its strengths. Officers relied on it to maintain constant communication between units. Scouts used it to gather intelligence quickly and return with vital information. Engineers used it to transport equipment and personnel across difficult terrain. In many cases, the Jeep became the connective tissue of the battlefield, linking different parts of the army into a cohesive and responsive force. German officers began to notice this difference as the war progressed. In North Africa, they saw British and American units using Jeeps to conduct rapid raids and outmaneuver larger formations. In Europe, they observed how quickly Allied forces could reorganize and push forward after breakthroughs. Even on the Eastern Front, where conditions were brutal and unforgiving, Jeeps supplied through Lend-Lease helped Soviet units maintain mobility in situations where heavier vehicles failed. Among those who recognized this advantage was Erwin Rommel, a commander known for his emphasis on speed and maneuver warfare. Rommel understood that the side which could move faster and respond quicker often gained the upper hand, regardless of the size of its weapons. The Jeep fit perfectly into this philosophy, giving Allied forces a level of operational flexibility that was difficult to counter. What made this realization so striking was how it contrasted with Germany's own approach to vehicle design. German engineering often prioritized complexity and performance, resulting in machines that were powerful but difficult to maintain. The American approach, by comparison, focused on standardization and simplicity. The Jeep embodied this philosophy. It was not the most powerful vehicle on the battlefield, but it was one of the most reliable and adaptable. By the end of the war, the cumulative effect of this difference had become impossible to ignore. German generals, reflecting on their experiences, began to see that the outcome of the conflict had been shaped not just by dramatic battles or advanced weapons, but by the steady, consistent application of practical tools that kept armies moving. The Jeep, in its simplicity, represented a fundamental shift in how modern warfare was conducted. So when those generals sat across from American officers in 1945 and gave their surprising answer, they were not simply commenting on a vehicle. They were acknowledging a deeper truth about the war they had just lost. Victory did not belong to the side with the most impressive machines, but to the one that could use its resources most effectively, maintain momentum, and adapt to every challenge. And in that regard, the humble Jeep had proven itself to be one of the most important weapons of the entire conflict.
In the summer of 1940, as war raged across Europe and the threat of global conflict grew, the United States Army realized it had a serious problem. Its forces lacked a fast, lightweight reconnaissance vehicle capable of keeping up with modern mobile warfare. Motorcycles were too vulnerable, trucks were too heavy, and existing cars simply could not handle rough terrain. The Army needed something entirely new, and it needed it immediately. What followed was one of the most urgent and demanding design challenges in military history. The Army issued a set of strict requirements to American manufacturers. The vehicle had to weigh less than 1,300 pounds, carry a payload of 600 pounds, have four-wheel drive, and be capable of speeds up to 50 miles per hour. It also had to be durable, easy to repair, and adaptable to multiple roles. But the most astonishing part was the deadline. Companies were given just 49 days to produce a working prototype. Most major automakers looked at the requirements and hesitated. The timeline seemed impossible, the specifications were demanding, and the financial risk was high. Only a small, struggling company stepped forward with a serious attempt. That company was American Bantam, operating out of Pennsylvania and already facing financial difficulties. Bantam did not have the resources of larger manufacturers, but it had something just as important: urgency and determination. To meet the Army's deadline, Bantam turned to an engineer who wasn't even on their payroll at the time. His name was Karl Probst, a freelance designer with a reputation for efficiency and practical thinking. At first, Probst refused the job. The conditions were too extreme and the expectations seemed unrealistic. But when he learned that the Army might cancel the project without immediate action, he changed his mind. What happened next became the stuff of legend. Working under intense pressure, Probst completed the initial design in just 2 days. In that short time, he translated the Army's complex requirements into a workable blueprint for a completely new type of vehicle. His design focused on simplicity, functionality, and strength. Every component had a purpose, and nothing was included unless it was absolutely necessary. Bantam engineers immediately began building the prototype based on Probst's plans. There was no room for error and no time for delays. Workers pushed through long hours, assembling parts, testing systems, and making adjustments on the fly. Against all odds, they completed the prototype just in time for delivery. When the vehicle arrived at the Army testing facility, it exceeded expectations. It was fast, agile, and capable of handling rough terrain with ease. However, the story did not end there. While Bantam had proven the concept, the Army knew that large-scale production would require greater industrial capacity. Two larger companies, Willys Overland and Ford Motor Company, were brought in to refine and mass-produce the design. Using Bantam's prototype as a foundation, these companies made improvements, particularly to the engine and durability. The final result was the Willys MB, the version of the vehicle that would go on to become iconic. It featured a reliable engine, robust suspension, and a design that balanced performance with simplicity. Perhaps most importantly, it could be produced in massive numbers using standardized parts. This was critical for wartime logistics, as it allowed for easier maintenance and faster repairs in the field. The contrast with German vehicle production was striking. German designs often emphasized precision and advanced engineering, but this came at the cost of complexity. Vehicles required specialized parts and skilled maintenance, which became increasingly difficult as the war stretched resources thin. The American Jeep, by comparison, could be maintained by ordinary soldiers with basic tools, keeping it operational even in harsh conditions. By the time the United States fully entered the war, the Jeep was ready. It was not the product of years of careful development, but of urgency, improvisation, and practical thinking. From a nearly bankrupt company and a freelance engineer working against the clock came a vehicle that would reshape modern warfare. In many ways, the Jeep's origin story mirrors its role on the battlefield. It was born out of necessity, built with speed, and designed to adapt. And just as it had met the challenge of its creation, it would go on to meet the far greater challenges of a world at war, proving that sometimes the most important innovations are not the most complex, but the most effective.
By 1942, the United States had transformed from a nation preparing for war into a full-scale industrial powerhouse. Factories that once produced civilian cars, appliances, and machinery were now retooled for military production. Assembly lines ran day and night. Workers operated in shifts around the clock, and the goal was no longer efficiency alone, but overwhelming output. In this environment, the Jeep became one of the clearest symbols of how industrial strength could shape the outcome of a global conflict. The production of the Willys MB was not limited to a single company. To meet the enormous demand, manufacturing was shared between Willys Overland and Ford Motor Company. This cooperation was unusual in peacetime, but essential during war. By standardizing the design and parts, both companies were able to produce nearly identical vehicles at scale, ensuring that repairs could be carried out easily no matter where the Jeep was deployed. The numbers alone tell a powerful story. Over 600,000 Jeeps were produced during the war, a figure that far exceeded anything Germany could achieve with its equivalent vehicle, the Volkswagen Kübelwagen. While the Kübelwagen was reliable in its own right, German industry struggled to match the sheer volume of American production. Limited resources, Allied bombing campaigns, and a more complex manufacturing system all contributed to this imbalance. But the importance of the Jeep was not just in how many were built, it was in how they were used. Unlike tanks or aircraft, which served specific roles, the Jeep was designed to be adaptable. It became a general-purpose vehicle that could be found in nearly every aspect of military operations. Commanders used it to move quickly between units. Messengers relied on it to deliver orders across dangerous terrain. Medics converted it into makeshift ambulances to evacuate the wounded. Engineers used it to transport tools and materials. In many cases, soldiers even mounted machine guns on Jeeps, turning them into fast-moving attack platforms. This versatility made the Jeep an essential part of military logistics. In modern warfare, supply lines are just as important as combat units. Armies require a constant flow of fuel, ammunition, food, and equipment. Without reliable transportation, even the most powerful force can become immobilized. The Jeep helped solve this problem by providing a fast, efficient way to move people and supplies wherever they were needed. One of the key advantages of the Jeep was its simplicity. Its design allowed soldiers to perform repairs in the field without specialized training. If a part broke, it could often be replaced quickly using standardized components. This reduced downtime and kept vehicles operational for longer periods.
In contrast, many German vehicles required more complex maintenance, which became increasingly difficult as resources and skilled personnel became scarce. Fuel efficiency also played a critical role. The Jeep consumed less fuel than larger vehicles, allowing it to operate longer and travel farther on limited supplies. This was particularly important in regions where fuel was difficult to obtain or transport. By reducing the logistical burden, the Allied forces were able to maintain momentum even in challenging situations. The impact of this mobility became evident on multiple fronts. In North Africa, Allied forces used jeeps to navigate vast desert landscapes where speed and reliability were essential. In Europe, they supported rapid advances following the D-Day landings, helping units push deeper into occupied territory. On the Eastern Front, jeeps through Lend-Lease agreements provided Soviet forces with additional mobility, complementing their own equipment and improving coordination across large distances. German commanders began to recognize that they were facing not just an army, but a system. The Allies were able to move faster, respond quicker, and sustain operations longer than their opponents. The Jeep was a critical part of this system, acting as a link between different elements of the military. It allowed information, supplies, and personnel to flow efficiently, creating a level of coordination that was difficult to disrupt. This realization highlighted a fundamental difference in strategy. German doctrine often emphasized decisive battles and powerful weapons, aiming to achieve quick victories through concentrated force. The Allied approach, supported by industrial production and logistical planning, focused on endurance and adaptability. Instead of relying on a single decisive advantage, they built a system that could absorb setbacks and continue advancing. By the later stages of the war, this difference had become decisive. German forces, stretched thin and struggling with supply shortages, found it increasingly difficult to respond to the constant pressure. Allied units, supported by a steady stream of equipment and vehicles like the Jeep, were able to maintain a relentless pace. They could regroup, resupply, and advance with a speed that overwhelmed their opponents. In this context, the Jeep was more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of a new way of fighting, one that prioritized movement, flexibility, and sustainability over sheer firepower. It demonstrated that the ability to keep an army moving could be just as important as the ability to fight. When historians look back at the war, they often focus on the dramatic moments, the battles, the breakthroughs, and the turning points. But beneath all of that was a quieter, constant effort to keep everything running. The Jeep played a central role in that effort, ensuring that soldiers could reach the front, supplies could reach those soldiers, and commanders could maintain control over rapidly changing situations. In the end, the success of the Jeep was not defined by any single battle or achievement, but by its consistency. It was always there, always working, always moving. And in a war where momentum could determine victory or defeat, that reliability made all the difference.
As the war spread across continents, the true strength of the Jeep began to reveal itself, not in factories or design rooms, but in the harshest environments on Earth. From scorching deserts to frozen plains, this small vehicle proved that adaptability could be just as powerful as firepower. It was no longer just a tool of logistics, it had become an essential part of frontline operations, shaping how battles were fought in dramatically different conditions. Soldiers came to rely on it not only for transportation, but also for morale, as its reliability gave them confidence in unpredictable situations. In the vast deserts of North Africa, mobility was everything. The terrain was unforgiving, with endless remal, extreme heat, and limited infrastructure. Traditional military vehicles often struggled in these conditions, breaking down or consuming too much fuel. But the Jeep thrived. Its lightweight design allowed it to move quickly across soft sand, and its mechanical simplicity made it easier to maintain in remote areas far from supply bases. It was here that one of the most innovative uses of the Jeep emerged. British Special Forces, particularly the Special Air Service, began modifying Jeeps for high-speed assault missions.
They stripped away unnecessary weight to make them even lighter, then mounted machine guns and additional fuel tanks. These modified vehicles were used in daring night raids deep behind enemy lines, targeting German airfields and supply depots. Instead of relying on large, slow-moving units, these commandos used speed and surprise. They would drive across the desert at night, attack quickly, and disappear before the enemy could respond. The Jeep made this possible. It could carry the necessary weapons and supplies while still maintaining the agility needed for hit-and-run tactics. German forces, accustomed to more conventional engagements, found it difficult to counter these unpredictable attacks. Even commanders like Erwin Rommel, who had mastered desert warfare, recognized the challenge posed by such mobility. Rommel understood the importance of speed, but the scale and flexibility provided by Allied vehicles like the Jeep created new tactical possibilities that were hard to match. The battlefield was no longer defined by fixed positions, but by constant movement and rapid adaptation. Thousands of miles away on the Eastern Front, the conditions could not have been more different. Here, the challenge was not heat, but extreme cold, mud, and vast distances. Through the Lend-Lease program, the United States supplied equipment to the Soviet Union, including large numbers of Jeeps. These vehicles played a crucial role in improving Soviet mobility, especially in areas where roads were poor or non-existent. Soviet forces used the Jeep for reconnaissance, communication, and transport. In a theater where distances between units could stretch for miles, the ability to move quickly was essential. The Jeep helped commanders maintain control over their forces, delivering orders and information across the front with greater speed and reliability. Even in freezing temperatures, where many machines failed, the Jeep continued to operate with remarkable consistency. Its presence allowed units to carry out operations that would have been impossible otherwise. The adaptability of the Jeep was further demonstrated in Europe, particularly after the Allied landings in Normandy. As forces pushed inland, they faced a constantly changing battlefield, with narrow roads, разрушенные towns, and unpredictable resistance. The Jeep became an indispensable tool for navigating this environment. Officers used it to coordinate advances, scouts relied on it to gather intelligence, and medics used it to evacuate the wounded under fire. War correspondents also took notice of the vehicle's importance. Among them was Ernie Pyle, who spent time with soldiers on the front lines. He described the Jeep in simple but powerful terms, calling it faithful as a dog, strong as a mule, and agile as a goat. His words captured what many soldiers felt. The Jeep was not just equipment, it was a trusted companion, always ready, always reliable. Its constant presence became a symbol of resilience in the chaos of war. What made the Jeep so effective across these different fronts was its universality. It could be adapted to almost any role or environment. In one moment it served as a command vehicle. In the next it carried ammunition or transported wounded soldiers. This flexibility reduced the need for specialized vehicles and allowed units to respond quickly to changing situations. German forces, by contrast, often relied on more specialized equipment. While this approach could be effective in certain scenarios, it lacked the flexibility needed for a global conflict with rapidly shifting conditions. The Jeep gave Allied forces a level of operational freedom that was difficult to counter. It allowed them to exploit opportunities, recover from setbacks, and maintain pressure on multiple fronts simultaneously. By the later stages of the war, it had become clear that the Jeep was not just supporting operations, it was shaping them. It enabled new tactics, improved coordination, and increased the overall effectiveness of Allied forces. Whether racing across the deserts of Africa, navigating the mud of Eastern Europe, or advancing through the towns of Western Europe, the Jeep proved that a simple, well-designed machine could have a profound impact on the outcome of a war. Its influence extended beyond tactics, changing how armies thought about mobility and logistics forever. In every theater, under every condition, the lesson was the same. The side that could move faster, adapt quicker, and sustain its operations would gain the advantage. And time again, the Jeep made that possible, turning mobility into a decisive weapon and leaving a lasting legacy on modern warfare.
After the guns fell silent in 1945, the world began to take stock of what had truly won the war.
Among tanks, planes, and battleships, one small, unassuming vehicle kept appearing in the stories of soldiers, commanders, and journalists alike: the Jeep. What had begun as a simple, practical solution to a military problem had grown into a symbol of American ingenuity, industrial might, and logistical genius. Its legacy would stretch far beyond the battlefields of World War II, influencing the design of civilian and military vehicles for decades to come. The Jeep had earned the respect of some of the highest-ranking military minds of the war. Dwight D. Eisenhower echoed the widespread sentiment of the front lines: the Jeep is one of most useful and most essential weapons. War correspondent Ernie Pyle captured the sentiment perfectly: faithful as a dog, strong as a mule, and agile as a goat. These were not empty words. Soldiers depended on the Jeep for everything from delivering messages under fire to evacuating the wounded, from reconnaissance missions to carrying vital supplies. Its reliability created confidence and a sense of security in the chaos of combat, and that psychological effect cannot be underestimated. Many soldiers would later describe the Jeep as one of their most trusted companions, a small constant in a world filled with uncertainty and danger. Its presence often boosted morale, knowing that no matter how difficult the mission, there was a dependable machine to carry them forward. Beyond the war, the Jeep inspired a new era of vehicle design. Its practical, no-nonsense approach influenced the development of vehicles like the Land Rover Series 1, which would go on to serve both civilian and military purposes around the world, and the Toyota Land Cruiser, which became synonymous with rugged reliability and adventure. Designers recognized that mobility, simplicity, and durability were as important as raw power, lessons first proven on the battlefields where Jeeps had dominated. These vehicles carried the same principles forward, emphasizing that versatility and endurance could be as critical as speed or size. The Jeep also changed how military planners thought about warfare itself. It demonstrated that a small, versatile, and reliable vehicle could amplify the effectiveness of entire armies. It was not just about the size of a force or the sophistication of its weapons. It was about how efficiently it could move, supply, and respond to unexpected challenges. Armies that could maintain momentum, adapt to terrain, and keep their forces connected held a decisive advantage, and the Jeep had made that possible. In effect, it became a tactical equalizer, allowing smaller units to operate with greater efficiency and greater autonomy than would otherwise have been possible. Even today, the Jeep remains an enduring symbol of practical ingenuity. Museums, vintage enthusiasts, and military historians continue to celebrate its impact, not for flashy victories, but for its quiet, relentless contribution to one of the most complex conflicts in human history. Its legacy is a reminder that sometimes the simplest ideas, executed well, can change the course of events on a global scale. The Jeep proved that practical design could meet extraordinary challenges, combining strength, reliability, and adaptability in a single vehicle. Ultimately, the story of the Jeep is the story of American determination, creativity, and industrial strength. From a near-bankrupt factory in Pennsylvania to deserts, frozen steppes, and cities across Europe, the vehicle proved that wars are often won not by the most spectacular weapons, but by the tools that keep armies moving, coordinated, and resilient. In the end, the Jeep was more than a machine. It was a symbol of victory, adaptability, and the enduring power of ingenuity. Its influence continues in military doctrine, vehicle design, and the popular imagination, a testament to the idea that innovation need not be complex to be transformative. The Jeep teaches that reliability, versatility, and clever design can leave a mark far greater than firepower alone, and that sometimes the humblest tool is the one that changes history.
Soldiers who survived the war often remembered not the biggest guns or heaviest tanks, but the small, dependable vehicle that carried them through every mission, every danger, every mile of terrain that seemed impossible to cross. Its story reminds us that practical innovation, resilience, and adaptability are timeless qualities, essential not just in war, but in any challenge that demands ingenuity under pressure. Even decades later, veterans and historians alike acknowledge that the Jeep's impact extended beyond strategy and tactics. It taught a generation that simplicity could triumph over complexity, that mobility could surpass raw strength, and that a clever, reliable solution could shape the outcome of a global conflict. The Jeep was more than a machine. It was a symbol of innovation, teamwork, and the enduring human drive to solve problems under the extreme circumstances. Its legacy endures as a reminder that the smallest, most practical ideas often leave the biggest mark in history.